All right, in this video, I really want to talk about a little bit of a bigger picture about how success can't move forward if you're holding on to too much decision making, if too much runs through you individually. And so this is going to be kind of about delegation, but not in the way most people address it. So stay tuned. It's very important for you to understand these principles because they will help unlock growth for you. Now, the first one is that in early stages of businesses, so let's say somewhere, up to about 5 million or so in business, maybe even higher, what tends to happen is the founder makes all of the decisions, or the executive, if there is one, makes all of the decisions in the business. Everything tends to run through them. Now, maybe not literally everything, but oftentimes it all tends to run through that person, or more so than what is really makes it possible for growth to happen. And for businesses of this size, oftentimes nimbleness and the ability to be flexible and the ability to do more than one thing at once, or to have to do more than one thing at once, to have to wear multiple hats, is more important than having specific structure. I was talking with the owner of a company recently, and they have nearly 70 employees, but they're small, but they're not tiny. And they were still talking about, well, we're a small company, so we don't have structures, we don't have this, we don't have that. And without knowing their specific numbers, I knew that most likely they have problems around growth. They probably can't, because they can't navigate or coordinate the resources that they have internally. And that's because they probably preferred speed in decision making or the flexibility to do what you want to do over having a consistency and structure. And just pure heroics can be sufficient. And this can carry people past 5 million. I've worked with companies that were doing 9 figures that were built this way, but they tended to collapse in on themselves. They're very, very hard to sustain to the point of near impossibility. And it's because they're based off of the just pure grind and efforts of an individual. Once you start to get larger, I see this start to kick in around 10 million. All of a sudden, the leaders of those companies realize, there's just too much going on. It's hard to remember it all. Sometimes they get larger. Sometimes they're at 20 or 30 or more million. But oftentimes, I'd say most companies, right around 10 is when you start to people notice that the volume of decision multiplies. The costs of errors start to increase. It becomes a bigger deal to make a mistake. Coordinating everything on your team becomes more and more complicated, and there's more and more interdependencies. You need different parts of the organization to work with each other and to show up at the right times, but it's harder to do that. It's harder to organize it. And what can tend to happen is if all of the decisions are running through one person, then it becomes too much. There's too much data trying to get through. There's not enough bandwidth with that one person to be able to manage it all. And so things start to bog down. It's a bottleneck with that individual. The basic concept here is that growth increases decision load. And if decision-making authority doesn't expand, growth will stall. So you have to, one of the key strategies that you have to consider if you want to lead growth is, how do we begin to structure and expand decision-making authority? That's the first concept that you have to accept if you want to be able to grow a company out. And the objections I usually run into with smaller companies is, I don't know that I can trust somebody, or there's no one that cares as much as I do, or nobody's going to work as hard, or nobody's going to work as well. You hear those three frequently. And my rebuttal to that is usually, well, you can look down at the road at your big competition, and you can see that their leader almost certainly doesn't have all decisions run through himself or herself. Usually they have distributed ownership in the sense of ownership of responsibilities. I don't mean equity ownership, but they have distributed authority, the distributed decision-making capacity in the organization, and somehow it works. And so the encouragement that I have for you is to believe there is a way to do it, and I do actually talk about it in other videos, and you have to be able to do that if you want to grow. The second point that I want to talk about is this concept that if you feel like my team just can't do it, my team comes to me for everything, you want to understand that dependency is conditioned. You've taught them to do that. It's not accidental. They're responding to what you've told them is, or who you've hired for. And so we want to begin to change the conditioning to create an empowered team that can make decisions more independently from yourself, so that more decisions are made well, and the organization can handle complicated scenarios more easily or more effectively. So here's some ideas or examples of how decision making gets held tightly. If you tend to re-decide other people's decisions, they make a decision, you tell them go make a decision, and then they come back to you and they're like, yeah, it's a nice idea, but we're going to do this instead. That's an example of that. Another opportunity or another example of how you teach people to be dependent is if people run into a problem and they come to you and they say, hey, I got a problem, instead of coaching them through their own problem-solving processes to figure out how to deal with that issue, you instead step in and fix it. It may feel like in the moment that stepping in to fix it is faster, it's just easier if I do it myself, but the 5th or 18th time that you have to step in and fix it, you have definitely spent more time fixing the problem than if you had just taught them how to fix it themselves. And so you want to be able to coach or train them to deal with the issues. So when a problem comes up and you realize, oh, this is a regular one, I need to slow down and begin to teach them how to do this, or coach them through thinking through how to do it themselves. Another element of how people can condition folks to be dependent is to actually reward escalation, to discourage people from making decisions themselves. If they don't make a decision precisely the way you would have made it, even if it's in the general direction of what you would have made, and you come down on them for that, or you challenge them for that. And so it's safer to come to you. Or in any other way, you make it better if people roll problems up to you, then people learn, okay, that's the better thing to do. I'm going to roll problems up. Another way that surprisingly, that you can force more decisions to come onto yourself, and it feels a little ironic in some ways, but actually having very loose or poor or no accountability habits and structures in the organization. If accountability is ad hoc when you've lost your patience and you pop on somebody. But if you have regular goal-setting meetings where there's clear goals, you know who's responsible for what, by when, how will know success will be measured, and that's identified, and on a weekly basis or whatever the right frequency is, you check in on progress towards those goals, that's actually more structure and more accountability, but it allows you to distribute out decision-making to more people because they have a better understanding of what they're supposed to accomplish and what your expectations will be as they pursue those goals. So interestingly enough, people that want to hold on to power also tend to have very poor accountability practices at the same time. If you notice that decisions are flowing upwards towards you, you should assume that individual initiative is atrophying and it's becoming weaker and less competent. So organizations do adapt to your behavior faster than you expect. And if you think, oh, it's just, the market these days, the employees these days, they're no good, or kids these days, or whatever the excuses are, you can't find anybody who's any good out there. You need to look at the degree to which you have created the conditions that you're operating in. And to a very high degree, and I know this because you can go to the competing business and you'll see that they have a different culture and a different set of results because of that. So you want to be able to create the culture, the leadership styles and approaches, which produces an empowered team and allows them to go pursue doing more in alignment with your expectations, as opposed to a disempowered team that looks to you for every decision. When decisions keep flowing back to the founder or back to the executive, it's a signal that structure has not caught up with the size of the business. Control still feels fragile and growth stalls. If you want a clear picture of where decision dependency exists in your company, start with the Value Builder Assessment. It's a free assessment that identifies structural weaknesses and strategic weaknesses and where ownership or leadership needs to shift. The link is in the description below. Basic reason why just delegating, like, hey, you've got this job, you got this, and you got that job, why that doesn't fix this decision-making issue is because oftentimes we haven't given sufficient ownership to the people that we've delegated to. Actually, the room I'm in right now, 16 years ago, we were building out this space here. And this is where I was learning some of these lessons. And I sent out some of my staff to go find furniture to furnish the suite that I'm in. And I just said, hey, go find furniture. I gave almost no description. Now, I did delegate to them, but I didn't give them a specific budget. I didn't give them any kind of decision-making authority. And so what happened is they didn't know what they could spend. They didn't know exactly what I wanted. They knew that I often was picky about things. And I didn't give them any kind of description so that they knew how to aim for what I might want. And as a result, I had to keep fielding calls and pictures and so on that came from them because they weren't empowered to make a decision. Here's what I was doing wrong and what you might be doing wrong, that if you change it, which I did do, you can begin to empower your team to make decisions, successful decisions, sometimes even more successful decisions in your absence than if you're there. One is if you assign tasks without giving people actual decision-making rights. A surprisingly high amount of time, we tell people you're in charge of this, but we haven't given them the right to make the decisions to be effective in that space. And we sometimes think about that as being like, even like in small outfits, but I was talking with a $50 million company today where at the executive level, senior president gave a major task to the number two, but didn't give clear decision-making rights or authority to that person. And so they were stuck. They didn't know how to move forward. And so this can happen in any size of organization, and it does stall action and it makes things harder. Second thing is that the first I mentioned tasks, and the second is basically the same, is that responsibilities. Like you are responsible for overseeing, training with the team, but the person's not given authority to really do that. You're responsible to oversee hiring, responsible to oversee quality control, whatever the thing is, but you're not given the authority to actually be able to act or enforce or move on what you need to do. And by authority, that also means having the funding or the budget to be able to do that, not having the control over whatever resources are needed to be successful at the responsibility that's been given. The fourth thing is that metrics are unclear. When are things supposed to be due, and how will we measure or recognize successful completion of this project? And when that's, or the assignment or the responsibility. And when that's unclear, people don't know what target to aim at. And when they don't, some people don't take shots at all. Other people just shoot at whatever they're interested in. And so if you want people to aim in the same direction, you need to make that target clear for them. The last thing, accountability tends to be very inconsistent. So if you don't follow through, some people, it just kind of keeps getting kicked down the road and it doesn't matter. Other people, you lose your patience on and you let them know it. And it feels very unpredictable and unreliable. And so there isn't really a structure or a culture of consistency that keeps people moving together in the right direction. So again, you need to have clear decision-making rights. You need to have given authority, which is whatever is needed to be able to follow through on an action or a responsibility. You need to be very clear in your expectations, defining your metrics. And the last piece is you need to have a consistent, structured accountability process or habit or pattern that helps all of this work together well. That's why delegation doesn't work, is because you don't have one or more of those four things. Usually if one doesn't exist, none of the others really exist either. If decisions still escalate up to you, you have not delegated effectively. You've just redistributed labor around. You haven't really given out responsibilities to other people. All right, so let's talk about what real ownership should look like. And by ownership, I'm not meaning equity ownership, I'm meaning owning responsibilities. At $15 million or so in a company in revenue, that's about where we start to see that companies or management within companies, especially senior management, should be able to completely solve operational issues without escalating things up. Management, especially senior management, maybe some mid-management, they're able to own some of their budget and they're able to make some decisions within their budget within defined guardrails. Doesn't mean they have the entire company's budget, but they have a piece of it. And they know that, okay, within my space, I have to stay within these guardrails, but I can use these resources to accomplish this objective. They're allowed to make hiring decisions within the function that they're responsible for. This is to build your senior team. When other people can choose and build their own teams, maybe with consultation, maybe with some support, but they're able to do that, you start to build a sense of ownership over their sphere of responsibility. And the last piece of this is if there's conflict between the different managers on your team, there's both structure and tools and encouragement for them to resolve it without you having to come in and mediate every little disagreement that occurs. Incidentally, on that point, my first book is called Conflict in Leadership, and it describes how to do that and how to structure a company to have less conflict. Accountability without authority will create paralysis. Authority without accountability will create chaos. If you want to grow, if you want to scale, you have to have both. both accountability and authority defined together. So there's 3 structural shifts that you want to put into place that will help decision making become easier. First, you want to move decisions closer to the work. I was recently working with a 9-figure company where purchases for maybe a $1,000 tool were still being run all the way up to the president of the company. There's just no way to run a company of that size if you're still making decisions like that. And so decisions needed to be delegated out with the necessary authority closer to the work so that they could be addressed in a more timely way and probably just more accurately, more effectively. 2, I like to have performance dashboards. What they do is, just like in the dashboard in your vehicle, I mean, you might have a bunch of information. On the old vehicles, you have dials, so there's only a little bit of information that could be there. Now, with vehicles, you've got a whole computer screen basically in front of you, so you have a lot of information. But most of the time, you really only need a little bit of information. You need to know kind of how fast am I going? You need to know how much gas there is in the tank. Maybe there's a couple of other things that you're tracking. For the most part, you can drive for many, many years without paying attention to most of the information available to you. What I like to do within organizations is, for each person's sphere of influence, I like to identify roughly 3 to 5 key performance metrics that tell us this team or this individual is probably on task. It could be 2 if that's what made sense. It could be 6 if that's what it made sense. But typically around 3 to 5 is enough that it tells you, is this person on track for what they're supposed to be accomplishing? And so if you have performance for growth or for improving safety or for improving quality or for improving efficiency or for getting a project done on time or whatever the thing is, there's probably 3 to 5 numbers, and they should be answered with a yes or a no or a number or a percent, an objective way of measuring it that will tell you performance. And so there should be a company-wide overall, what's the big goals that we're trying to hit, and then for each division or department of the company or team, what are their performance goals that they're supposed to pursue, and what are the top 3 to 5 that we're tracking for them, and how do we measure success? When you have this in place, it makes meetings go so much faster. It helps people stay very focused, and you will discover a sense of traction that you didn't know was possible in your organization. One of the worst things, I hate these kinds of meetings, is to sit in a meeting where everybody's reporting in a narrative form this long story about what they're getting done, because they always want it to sound, usually, not always, usually they want it to sound as positive as possible. And so they're not sure, especially if they don't know what you're looking for, they'll put everything into the story that they can, many people. Other people will complain about all the problems. Either way, you hear a lot of words, and after about 10 or 15 minutes of those meetings, which you might be halfway through one report at that point, people they're taking naps, they're gone. They're not involved in the meeting anymore. And whatever it was the meeting was supposed to do, it's not working, even if the meeting was just about reporting. I love dashboards because they take the critical, the essential information, they lift it to the top, and they let you know we're hitting the numbers or not. And if you're hitting the numbers, maybe you have a little bit of discussion around that. Maybe we should be setting bigger goals, or hey, good job. But you don't have to spend another 15, 20 minutes talking about it. If you're not hitting the numbers in one of these areas, you talk about that one area, not everything else. And so it helps speed conversations up, makes accountability a lot easier because people know what they're going to report on. The last is the leader stops rescuing. And this is huge. If you keep stepping in to fix things, solve things, it's faster if I do it, I'm better at it anyways, I can't trust these people, etc., then you are building dependency, and that will not change unless you change. And so I'm not going to say that that's necessarily easy for you to do, but you can do it because people do it all the time. And I want to encourage you to stop rescuing, start coaching, start giving people a strong sense of what the expectations are, help them make some of those decisions, and you'll find that all of a sudden success feels easier because all these decisions are not running up to you. When decisions stop running through you, success becomes lighter instead of heavier. Ownership replaces dependence. Growth accelerates without increasing pressure. But many businesses never make that shift because they're constrained by a deeper scaling bottleneck, one that silently caps valuation long before founders see it. In the next video, I'll break down what that bottleneck is and why institutions institutional buyers see it immediately. You can watch that video right here.